Welcome, and thank you for joining us in the Shifting Power session of Values Aligned Procurement for National Farm to School Network. I am Jana Parker, and I'm a policy associate with National Farm to School Network. National Farm to School Network is an information advocacy and networking hub for communities working to bring local food sourcing, school gardens, and food and agricultural education into schools and early childhood educational settings. National Farm to School Network increases access to local food and nutrition education to improve children's health, strengthen family farms, and cultivate vibrant communities. Today's session will be focusing on values-aligned procurement. At the National Farm to School Network, we believe in 6 shared community values that will move us closer to a just and equitable food system that promotes the health of all school children and benefits producers, workers, educators, and their communities. Our values are economic justice, environmental justice, health impact, prioritizing racial equity, respecting workers and educators, and animal welfare. In order for these values to be realized, it is important that the most impacted stakeholders in our communities have a core role in the development and implementation in every aspect in the food supply chain, but especially in procurement. Procurement between farms and schools can play an important and vital role in connecting local food producers and suppliers directly to schools and school districts in a manner that can provide students with fresh, delicious, local whole foods. Today, we are joined by a wonderful group of panelists. Jennifer Gaddis, Associate Professor of Civil Society and Community Studies of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Cheng Vu, Capacity Building Director of the Home American Farmers Association. Jose Oliva of the Heal Food Alliance, and Jackie Winsett from DC Central Kitchen. I'm going to let the panelists take about 6 minutes each to introduce themselves, their pronouns, their organizations, and their roles within advocacy, starting with Professor Gaddis, then Cheng Vu, Jose Oliva, and then ending with Jackie Winsett.
All right, hi everybody. I'm Jen Gaddis, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I'm in a really small department called Civil Society and Community Studies. So it's a department that is very interdisciplinary and where we're often encouraged to partner with nonprofit and community organizations. So it's a real pleasure to be with you all today. And I just wanted to start off by saying that I really appreciated the focus, facilitation, and participation of the last session. So thanks very much to all those who've been involved in both organizing the event and participating thus far. So I also wanted to mention that in addition to my role as a professor, I am actually a new advisory board member for the National Farm to School Network. And it's been a real pleasure since January to be part of this organization and their work, because it's one that I not only find really inspiring at the moment in terms of their really forward thinking, and I think very thought-provoking and action-provoking call to action. But also when I started doing research on school food a little over a decade ago when I was working on my PhD, this was one of the organizations that I think got me initially interested as somebody who was in the environmental studies space, and both the power and potential of really changing what our public food programs look like, beginning with school meals. So I'm really excited to have that new role with the National Farm to School Network. And I'm also part of an organization. I'm a board member for scholarly society called Agriculture, Food, and Human Values Society that brings together a lot of people who study food systems issues, and in particular how food relates to human values and what values we might hold and express through our food systems. So those are a few of the different organizational hats that I wear. I should mention that a lot of my expertise is not only within the space of community food systems, but in particular, over the years, I've really developed a strong interest in both labor and sustainability transitions and how those can occur within the context of public school lunch programs. So the first research that I was doing was really focused in particular on the context that we have here in the United States with these federally funded national school lunch and breakfast programs. But recently, I've also done some comparative research in countries that have universal values-based meal programs. So specifically, before the pandemic started, I was doing some field work both in Japan and in South Korea, and that's gotten a little bit sidelined, but I'm happy to talk about not only those countries' programs, but also I think Brazil and Finland and a few others have some really interesting ones to look at within this idea of how do you actually express values held by society that maybe are more progressive and more justice oriented than the default food system. Like, how do you express that through school lunch programs, and how do you start to use the power of public procurement to try to shift food systems more broadly? So that's something that I'm happy to talk about within not just the US context, but also from this international comparative perspective. One thing that I should mention as well is that I wrote a book that came out, I think in November of 2019, called The Labor of Lunch: Why We Need Real Food and Real Jobs in American Public Schools. And I think one of the emphases of that book is really to try to get people to think more deeply about what food production looks like in schools, and the role that cafeteria workers play, not only in making it possible to do things like values-based procurement. So if you are primarily just running a heat and serve operation, that places a lot more limitations in terms of how you might be able to express values through sourcing, and even express values through job creation. So the heat and serve model keeps workers primarily in low wage, short hour positions where oftentimes workers aren't eligible for benefits because they're working, say, 15 minutes shy of what their contract might make eligible for benefits. So I think that this piece about empowering workers as not only a way to start really creating better quality jobs in our communities through school food, but then also to open up new possibilities across the school food supply chain in terms of what schools would be sourcing is a big piece that I wanted to contribute with that book, as well as opening up space for people to recognize all the ways that cafeteria workers, when they're in full-time positions, when they have job security, when they're empowered to really play the full role that they can play in their communities, how they're able to express community care. And what I mean by community care is this knowledge not only of individual students, but also how they're maybe connected in neighborhoods or in family structures. And in particular, cafeteria workers, when they are in jobs that are of sufficient quality, that they're able to stay in them for a prolonged period of time, rather than having to turn over into another job, which is very common in a lot of areas within the food service industry. When they're able to stay in those positions, I think that they can play a really important role in providing emotional support and care for kids in schools, because a lot of kids, especially if you're thinking about the elementary levels, they might have a different teacher from year to year, but cafeteria workers could ostensibly stay the same for a very long period of time. So I think that it's a really overlooked piece of the puzzle in terms of thinking about not just how investing in cafeteria workers can open up a lot of possibilities for changing how we source food, but also how the experiences of youth and young people can start to play a role in really shaping what their cafeteria environment and what their meals look like. So cafeteria workers, I think, can really be a great touch point in terms of knowing the students and knowing their preferences, and being able to think about, well, what would it look like if we actually had school food programs that reflected the diversity and celebrated that in terms of what we actually have going on in our schools. So one thing that I wanted to mention in my first book was that I did partner with an organization, Unite Here, on their Real Food, Real Jobs campaign. So this is a labor union, and a lot of the work that I do, both research-wise and through the courses that I teach, involve partnerships, whether it be with labor unions or school districts or nonprofits that are really wanting to do what we oftentimes refer to as action-oriented research or engaged research that involves a partnership with academic partner, and whether it be school district, labor union, or nonprofit, to develop research questions that can then inform advocacy goals for the particular organization. So I'll just end by saying that right now, because pandemic has sort of made things necessary in terms of focusing a little closer to home and restricting travel, it's been a really great opportunity for me to start investing more of my research and community-based teaching time in a partnership with my local school district. So I've been working for about the last 6 or 7 months with the Madison Metropolitan School District, and that research as a kind of collaborative project is going to continue into this next year. So that's something that I'm really excited about, and kind of came up initially in a response to an opportunity to be thinking about how improving school meals could actually improve school climate by starting to attract more of the upper middle class and middle class kids who, at least in Madison, Wisconsin, where I am, are like disproportionately white students as well, to actually eat meals in school versus continuing this space where it really seems to be like there's a lot of both class and race-based segregation in the cafeteria in terms of who is bringing meals from home versus who's participating in the federal programs. So I think I'll end there and pass things along.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. I did love your connection about how being a former educator, I love how you tied in the fact that sometimes students will see different educators every year, but they do oftentimes have the same person providing them the meals that get them through the day, and how important that is. Thank you so very much. Mr. Chang Vu.
Hi, hello everyone. Thanks for having me. So my name is Chang Vu. Pronoun is he, him. As of that, my organization that I work at is the Hmong American Farmer Association, in short, HAFA. So my role here at HAFA here is at the capacity building director here. And as of that, I wear different hats too, depending on like what is need to be done on a daily basis. And as of that, HAFA is a nonprofit located in Minnesota, Hastings, Hastings, Minnesota. And as of that, we are a mixed vegetable production. So we do a lot of greens and a lot of healthy stuff. And then we also do a little bit of flowers also. And we do occupy 155 acres. As of that, 130 acres is used. And as of that, these are Hmong farmers, immigrant farmers. And from this, I am in charge of different kind of programs here at the farm here. As from that, one is what me and my team are heavily focusing on right now is our food hub. As of that, the CSA program, the community supporting agriculture. From that, this year we have a total around 500 shares. As of this, it's kind of broken down into half shares and full shares, and also flower shares too. And we are also doing a program we call VegRx. As of this, this program is to bring or give out free vegetables to patients at the clinics that we work with. From this, it is another thing that we do work with. As of this, we are also building community wealth too. And from that, another program that I am also in charge of is a training too. So during the off season of farming, what we do is multiple different kind of trainings. I'll talk about two of them that are that are heavily focused on. One is soil health. From this, during the off season, we do have soil samples. And from this, we want our farmers to make sure that they have adequate land to farm on. And from this, also post-harvesting, understanding food safety practices, what is up to date. Just a month ago, we did our PSA training, our Produce Safety Alliance. From that, we actually did the first pilot Hmong PSA training. As of this, 90% of our farmers that are members here are certified as a PSA grower. As from this, this opens up the market to our farmers. From that, if they want to sell wholesale wise, they are eligible. And from this also, we do have a training of business development management. From this, we help farmers what they call an equip program. From this is like we help them attain microloan. From that, they're eligible for high tunnels and any other production, such as like any other assets, such as tractors. And something that's really interesting about HAFA is this year we are trying to purchase the land, the 155 acres, to become HAFA's, to own it. So as of this, it's very exciting. We're also doing a capital campaign to, by the end of this year, fully obtain the land. So then it could be the farmers, so that the vision of it is to have it as a cooperative. So so farmers can help each other, and from that, build the relationship, and also open up markets to procurements, and also like just to send out produce to like schools also, because we do work with institutes. So HAFA works with Minneapolis Public Schools. As from that, we do send produce to them depending on what we're contracted throughout the year. So that's it about HAFA.
Thank you, Mr. Vu. Mr. Oliva?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jose Oliva. I'm the campaigns director at HEAL Food Alliance. HEAL is a national multi-sector, multiracial coalition. It stands for Health, Environment, Agriculture, and Labor. And my pronouns are he and his. And I think what I want to do is just give you a little bit of a background on how I got involved in this work and why this work is important to us at HEAL. So I was born and raised in Guatemala. My family had to come here in the 1980s as a result of a civil war that killed over 200,000 people in that country. And the Civil War happened because in the 50s, there was a socialist regime that was attempting to redistribute land to landless peasants. And some of that land was held by the United Fruit Company, today known as Chiquita Banana. As soon as the CIA and the federal government, the US federal government, found out that this was happening, they orchestrated a coup that overthrew that government, even though it was democratically elected and it had the support of the people, overthrew that government, and that triggered the Civil War. And so my family came here, and even though we came here because we were fleeing the war, as many of you probably know, there is no pathway for citizenship for a lot of folks, especially those fleeing from Latin American countries. And so we were undocumented. I was undocumented for 20 years. When it was time for me to go to college, and I started to look into getting a scholarship or a Pell Grant, I realized I couldn't get any of that because I was undocumented. And so I got a job in the restaurant industry and worked in the restaurant industry for about 10 years. So my 4-year bachelor degree took 8 years to get because I was going to school part-time, paying for credit hours as I went along. And that gave me a direct exposure into the food system, sort of a worm's eye view, if you will, right? Working in the restaurant industry. And then knowing my family's history back in Guatemala and the fact that there were international repercussions to the industrial food system in this country gave me a really crisp view of how this food system is central to all things that we consider to be justice. So whether it's racial justice, gender justice, labor justice, it's all really interconnected via this food system. We started to do a lot of work a few years ago to connect various worker organizations and founded an organization called the Food Chain Workers Alliance, representing about 350,000 workers throughout the entire food system. And in the process of doing that, we realized that whether it was restaurant workers at the end of the food supply chain or farm workers at the beginning of the supply chain, that all of these workers had one thing in common, and that was that they all worked inside of a food system that was not predicated specifically just on labor, but that there were health implications and environmental implications and ag implications to everything that this food system does in our society. And so that's what led us then to the creation of the HEAL Food Alliance, right? Bringing together multiple sectors, folks who are concerned about how food impacts the human body in terms of nutrition and health, folks who are concerned about what food does to the environment, both on the production end and on the waste end, and folks who are concerned about animal agriculture, urban agriculture, rural agriculture, and of course, workers, right? Food Chain Workers was one of the 4 anchor organizations that founded the HEAL Food Alliance. And since then, we've realized that procurement gives us a huge tool to actually improve the lives of workers on the ground, regardless of where they are in the supply chain. And we've started to do a lot of work to move this multi-sector procurement tool that we're calling the Good Food Communities tool that uses things like the good food purchasing policy and other policies as a way of improving workers' lives. I'll talk a little bit more about that during the session, but the essence of what we're trying to do is look at all of these value categories: human health, environmental sustainability, animal welfare, local economies, labor, as they are all equally important, right? Like we can't pick and choose which one of these things is the most important. And in order for us to be able to really transform the food system, we have to focus on all at the same time rather than individual issues. So I'll leave it at that as an introduction, and we'll talk more during the session.
Thank you so very much. That was wonderful. Ms. Jackie Winsack.
Hi, everyone. As you mentioned, my name is Jackie Winsack. I work with DC Central Kitchen. Say pronouns she and her. It's really great to be here with all the panelists and all of you here. Thanks for joining and thanks for putting on this presentation, the whole series. It's great to learn from your expertise and share our individual experiences. So I'm really excited to join. So I work with DC Central Kitchen, their Procurement and Sustainability Department, which really means we're managing all of our internal donations that are coming in, supplementing those with everything that we would need to procure for our operations to run smoothly, supplies or food, and managing a lot of our sustainability initiatives, which right now ranges from our composting efforts to food waste tracking, and we're going to be taking on a new digester soon. So kind of running the gamut. We've really had food waste at the core of our work for a lot of years. It's started off, DC Central Kitchen started off in 1989, really trying to fight food waste by recovering food from catering operations and restaurants, and working with very talented chefs to transform those meals and transform that wasted food into meals for community shelters. Shortly after that, we started up a culinary job training program, which was intended to prepare individuals who have really high barriers to employment. Perhaps they've had rough combination of circumstances, illness in their family, formerly incarcerated, former addiction, homelessness. Really ran the gamut in preparing those individuals in order to overcome those barriers and develop a career within the culinary arts. Both of those initiatives have fully expanded, and our programs have truly expanded as well to not just be a food recovery organization, but an overall social enterprise. When it comes to food recovery, we are still working with restaurants and those catering operations, but we're working with farms, manufacturers, wholesalers, food service organizations of all sizes. Our culinary job training program is continued to expand. We have over 50% of our staff being graduates from the culinary job training program, 50% of my individual department, individuals that have many talents beyond just their culinary skills and contributed greatly to DC Central Kitchen and their communities. We've also expanded that program to have a youth focus as well. We started up one cafe and growing into 2 cafes to train individuals, again, in the culinary arts, but also small business practices, customer service, and be able to serve their communities, in Ward 7 of Washington, DC. A few of our other programs, before I get into some of our work in schools, we have our Healthy Corners division, which is a bunch of corner store networks that we've started up really to demonstrate the need and viability of grocery stores being able to cater to communities that are food deserts within Washington, DC. We buy items in bulk, fresh produce, healthy snacks, and distribute them to those corner stores and are able to sell them, sell them at a discounted rate. So again, I think this has demonstrated a lot of success in those neighborhoods, and again, a need for those nutritious items within those communities. We also started working within public schools several years ago. I think this was back in 2008 that program started up. So I appreciate Jen's comments about having individuals working within our cafeterias who have a strong relationship with those students. Our staff is very well in tune with the needs of that community, regularly providing us feedback on their interests and the foods that they want to see. Also, we're just cooking those meals right in the cafeterias. So we're able to use a lot of our procurement and buying power to get locally purchased food, to make a nutritional, well-rounded meal for the kids to take home. The another program that I just wanted to highlight, since it popped up during the COVID epidemic within the last year, was our grocery bag program. This really started off because we were getting just a flood of donations back in March and April leading into the summer of donations, primarily produce from a lot of our regular donors, but a lot of other avenues as well. We were looking for ways to distribute that to the community, as fast as we possibly could, since these were largely perishable items. We were grateful to get space from some of our community business partners, our convention center here in Washington, DC, some catering companies that had extra space within DC as well. And we're able to pack those items into grocery bags, basically, to distribute to the community. That has really grown into a program where we've been able to, instead of using donated product, supplement with a lot of fresh produce items specifically focused on procuring from local farms and still distributing to those communities. We've partnered with a lot of nonprofits, churches, other groups within Washington, D.C. so that they can be the voices and hearts on the ground distributing those items, while we can be the supplier procuring and making sure that we get a variety of dishes out to them, and recipe cards, things for ideas for storage, stuff like that. Overall, we've spent, since March, we've spent over $2 million with local farmers from this program and with our regular procurement for our school food programs and our community meals. Since March of last year, we had over 4.5 million meals that we're distributing. It was 3 million pounds of fresh produce that we're distributing out. So a lot of different avenues that we've been focusing on to use our buying power within DC Central Kitchen in order to support local farms. I will note that a huge focus has been increasing our purchasing from Bipoc farms within the community. We recognize that this supports a big value for DC Central Kitchen. It's also a population of farmers that doesn't always have steady support. And with our grocery bag program, our community meals, and our school foods, all using fresh produce items, we have a lot more flexibility to use a great mix of their produce, constantly be in communication with them for whichever way they're able to help out, whether it's hundreds of thousands of pounds or maybe just 50 to a few hundred here and there. Let's see here. I just want to touch on a few notes for the advocacy that I've been involved in personally within DC Central Kitchen and then outside. I work with DC's Food Policy Council, and we've been working on our food buying guide, actually trying to support individuals' initiatives to start up more local and responsible purchasing within their institutional organizations. I've also, after moving, I've also gotten involved in our neighbor in Maryland, so Montgomery County's Food Policy Council as well, trying to get my feet wet and see some of those ties from DC to our neighbors in Maryland. I also work with DC Food Recovery Working Group, since so much of my day is focused on recovering food. Trying to work with those partners, to name a couple. Food Rescue US is a huge one, to make sure that we're getting the best resources we can to individuals and to recover food and waste as little as possible. I'll leave it there. I'm excited to answer any questions from the audience and talk to our friends.
Thank you so much. We have just a stellar panel of individuals, and I'm so excited to get ready to ask them questions and hear directly from them. As we jump into the discussion today, I want to encourage the audience to put any questions that you have within the chat, because we will have a question and answer portion directly from your questions in the chat at the end of the panel. So we're talking about shifting powers to a values-aligned procurement. And to give a quick explanation of what that means, it means to center the way that we procure food within our food supply for our children around core values that guide what we think your food procurement should look like. Our values here at National Farm to School Network is economic justice, environmental justice, health impact, prioritizing racial equity, respecting workers and educators, as well as animal welfare, which highlight areas of focus needing to be addressed within our food systems to make it more equitable and just. That being said, I'm going to start off with this lead question. What is the importance of value-aligned procurement? Like, why is it important to have this? I'm going to start with Jackie Winsack.
Sure. Well, I think you offered us a great intro to that discussion. I think that values-based procurement really just recognizes the reality of the world that we live in, and really the impacts and some of the historical decisions that we've made. I think we can be honest in acknowledging that we have been a little too slow in making movements towards environmental sustainable practices, and those decisions will have lasting impacts on supply chain and our abilities to procure certain items. Especially our Bipoc partners truly have been systematically, purposely pushed into difficult positions, less likely to be able to have the resources to purchase, own land, develop a lot of business partnerships. The complete disregard when it comes to labor practices and animal welfare, as it wasn't always a priority. And just as we've learned more about the health impacts of food as it changes over time, learning what it means to have a healthy lifestyle and what that can mean for our bodies and minds, especially for children as they're developing. So I think Jose mentioned earlier, you can't really pick and choose which values you're going to be, you're going to acknowledge and try to, take on as you purchase more responsibly. But it is important for each individual organization to recognize, the hierarchy and how far your resources can go. Thinking about what's important to you, realistically, what would be a high bar for you, and what would be maybe some low-hanging fruit you can take on very quickly, and what should be your goals to ultimately achieve down the road, and what you need to be able to get there. So I know it's going to look different from every organization, and some of those that Jen just outlined might not be yours in your individual organizations, but to look back on what you can change about your procurement habits to take those values and kind of put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah, and that question is open to everyone on the panel. So
I'll pop in for just a second to say that I think values-based procurement is always important, but especially for publicly funded food programs and school food programs in particular. So one thing that I think is not always recognized about school food is just how widespread of an institution, in particular the National School Lunch Program is. It operates in over 100,000 institutions, like practically every neighborhood that you can think of has a school that already has this public program operating within it. So I think school food is a really important economically and culturally specific place to be really renegotiating food politics and building power. And so I just wanted to say that in particular, I think that because school food is a federally funded program, really pushing for changes at the federal level for what we're sort of using public food dollars to do and what values that expresses, to me is really important to do. And I've been excited to see how much advocacy has shifted and how much sort of momentum has been generated, particularly around like the school food space in the past year or so with the pandemic.
Yeah, I'll jump into really quick. The reality is that we have always had values-based procurement, right? Like, we buy food based primarily on the budget of the institution. And that is a choice to buy that cheap food that's going to degrade the environment and exploit workers is a choice. It might be a hidden choice. It might not be something that is upfront and not a spoken choice, but it is a choice. What's happened recently is there's been a shift and sort of the unveiling of what those choices have led us to, right? The impacts on the environment, the impacts on workers, the impacts on animals and so forth, that those choices of cheapness have actually created. And so what I have seen now, and I think I'm really excited about this, is more and more folks realizing that you can't squeeze one end of the balloon without the other end popping, right? Like you have to be able to take a comprehensive approach in order for us to get to a place where our food system actually does reflect the values that we hold, right? As people, as human beings, and as a nation. And I'll just tell one quick story to highlight this, right? A few years ago here in Chicago, there was a very vigorous campaign to get Subway to stop purchasing bread from a particular bakery because that bakery was putting this ingredient in the Subway sandwiches that was kind of like the same ingredient that comes in yoga mats. It was really harmful to the human being who was eating it and harmful to the environment. And they won. That campaign was victorious, and they went and they moved their operation. Instead of buying bread from this one bakery, they started to buy from a different one that was organic, that was much better for the environment. But what they didn't realize was that the folks who worked in that other bakery were union workers. They were making up to $20 an hour. And they went and they started buying bread from this other bakery that was employing minimum wage workers, right? And so they essentially pulled the rug out from under livable wage jobs for Black and Indigenous people of color in order to, deal with this one issue, right? And so the point is not that we shouldn't care about the environment. The point is that we should care about all of these things simultaneously, right? They are all interconnected. And if we are not looking at what the entire balloon looks like, we're going to continue to squeeze one end and the other end is going to pop.
Yeah, I'm gonna add a little bit to that too. So if we're talking about procurement, we're talking about like the cost of it. So at Halfway here, we also do a training of break-even analysis. As of this, we try to get the cost production, all that stuff into a cost of the production of the product or the produce. As of this, we have to understand that like from this. Yes, we do want to sell to school and stuff like that, but then sometimes, these institutes are actually selling less than what we're offering. And from that, then these Bipoc farmers or our farmers are not actually are getting the short end of the stick. So from that, then we do think of all that to consider too. Like, yes, we don't want to devalue any like produce or any sort of crop or anything like that, but then sometimes we get the short end of the stick because it's the cost of that, like when we are growing that like that corn, like we're selling that corn for like 80 cents, but then like the other industries are selling it for 60 cents. Then from that, then like we're losing, but then like we want to sell to school too. So from that, like because like food travels, from that the cost of food traveling also is a consideration also.
I love the go ahead, Jackie. We can't hear you. Well, we still can't hear you, Jackie. Okay. Oh, wait, no worries. But I really love the points that you guys are bringing out. Jose, one thing that you brought out that I thought was that hit me just immediately over the head is what you said about we already have values procurement. We already have that. Like the system is showing what they value and how they value in the manner in which they do procurement and how important it is to shift, right, the values that we currently have to values that align with where we want to see our world, what type of world we want to become. That kind of talks about shifting power in general. So my next question is, what does shifting power within food procurement look like for you and your organizations, particularly in regards to these values aligned that we have discussed already? I'm going to start with Jennifer, and then of course, definitely want to hear from the rest of the panel because this is so good.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one of the things that for me is really important in my work is to think about who are some of the people that are most impacted in terms of groups of people. And I think it's youth and cafeteria workers who are actually like very much both at the very localized level and at the federal level, oftentimes left out of discussions about what school food should look like. So I think in the research and also organizing work that I do, shifting power means not only investing in youth food justice organizing, but also really working with workers, whether they be unionized or not yet unionized, to recognize their own power and how that can be really used as a force for public good beyond even just their own individual stakeholder positions within the school food system, but can really be something that can drive the entire system forward in terms of transformation. Because one thing that I would just recognize in terms of this history of cheapness and how that's really shaped the national school lunch and breakfast programs is we have to think about who disproportionately this program has served. And I think that because it is such a disproportionately racialized and economically disadvantaged group of people who have benefited from this program, like benefited in terms of it being a public entitlement. I think that it's not really a huge surprise when we look at a lot of different entitlement programs. So like programs that are funded by the government as part of a welfare state. They tend to be lower quality and less participatory in terms of decision making than programs that are universal in nature. So I think that challenging this idea of cheapness is something that we can do both through a historical lens in terms of really interrogating, well, why has the system why has it been allowed to look the way that it does? But then also, who might we engage in building new constituencies and new coalitions to really challenge this idea of cheapness being synonymous with public value, and instead build a really different vision that hopefully could make school food something that everyone would actively want to participate in.
That is so right on, Jennifer. And Jenna, thank you for the question. That is the question, right? If we don't have power, we will be unable to shift the systems that we need to shift, and we know that they need to shift, right? So Heal Food Alliance took almost 2 years to craft a platform that we call the Platform for Real Food. And you can find it on our website, healfoodalliance.org. We worked with over 150 organizations all over the country to develop this 10-point platform. And it gives you, in essence, a recipe for how we can transform this food system. What it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you the amount of power that we're going to need to do that. Right? And we do know, we work with the assumption of that old African proverb of nothing about us without us is for us. That's just a fundamental principle for Heal. And so we know that it has to be us that are at the core of leadership and driving this change. And we also know, not us Heal, I don't mean us as an organization, I mean the people who are most directly impacted and at the forefront, if you will, of the effects of this food system. That it has to be us that shifts the food system, because we have the solutions, we know what they are. And so I really do want us all to think, regardless of whether you're in DC Central Kitchen, right, and you're essentially providing meals for folks, right, or whether you're a farmer in Minnesota, right, we all play a role in this food system, and we all have to be thinking about power in the same way and about how we build it, because that's the only way that we're going to get to the food system that we need.
Yeah, I like what you have to say. I think sometimes, power comes in numbers, and after that, yes, like I think just having power in general of this food, and I think there's so many avenues that we can look at this, and from this, I think if we come together and just like think about like where the food goes, like food goes so far. I think sometimes like many may think like you just go to the grocery store and just get your produce, but sometimes it comes from the farm, and like then it's like it has so many steps just to get to where it goes to.
So. Sorry, I jumped in late, but I think that we live in a world that is driven by consumerism, and therefore we should not be surprised that everything is done for short-term gain at the expense of justice and health, essentially. So we just need to change the paradigm and look at things through a different lens. You seem to be, all of you seem to be far more ahead of where we are in Florida, where we're still stuck in, having large corporation provide cheap meals in spite of minor efforts that are done by the state to sell more fresh, locally grown produce.
Thank you so much, Mr. Root. We thank you so much for providing your feedback. We're gonna allow the panelists to kind of guide the questioning and answering at this point, but we will open it up to remarks from the audience. Yeah, at the end of this. But thank you so much. And that is something that we're struggling about all around. And I think you hit on something that's very important, Mr. Root, when we talk about cheap food production and that being a value. It also kind of ties into how exactly we are honoring the people that bring us the food, that work within that particular capacity. So, I mean, my next question is, what is the importance in the connection to workers' rights within the procurement process? Because this whole thing is tied to the very people that bring us the food. I'm gonna go ahead and allow Jose from the panel to start answering with that question.
Yeah, and my answer is going to actually also address some of the questions that are emerging in the chat. So back in 2010, I was still at Food Chain Workers Alliance, and our members were trying to address the question of how we use procurement as a way of finding some better working conditions and better wages for workers. So whether that was encouraging more, purchasing more food from union shops, or whether it was looking at certification programs that actually work, we wanted to make sure that we were using procurement, right? Because we knew the power that we had if we were buying lots of food versus if it was just, small bits here and there. And what we landed on was working with the mayor's office in the city of LA, where they already had a process ongoing, looking at health and environmental issues as drivers of what kind of food that city wanted to buy. And we included labor in there, right? So that was the emergence of what is now known as the GFPP, the Good Food Purchasing Program. And I would encourage anyone to look at goodfoodcities.org as a beginning for that. And what we did there was we looked at those 5 value categories of human health, environmental sustainability, animal welfare, local economies, and valued workforce, and developed a matrix for all 5 of them, so that big entities like the LA Unified School District had to meet criteria in each of the 5, right? They didn't get to pick and choose which one they were going to use. They had to meet at least a baseline criteria for each of the 5 value categories. And what that did in LA, at least, is that it shifted who the city was buying food from, right? And so a lot of union shops suddenly became part of the supply chain. A lot of places that were environmental, that were looking at environmental impacts of the food system suddenly became part of the supply chain. And that to us was the first step in then looking at how do we do this at a national level, right? Like, how do we bring values-based procurement is the term now, right? But at the time we were just thinking, how do we bring labor, and environmental issues and all of this into a procurement process that allows these large institutions to buy food that have all of these things. And that was driven by workers. It was driven by members of Food Chain Workers Alliance that really wanted to make sure that workers were at the center, right, of how large institutions identified who to buy food from and how much of that food was going to be X versus Y.
Yeah, and that question is definitely open to the rest of the panel in regards to the importance and the connection of workers' rights within the procurement process.
One other thing that I will add to sorry about this. I just want to say that the food system workers are the largest segment of the US workforce. Before the pandemic, there were 21.5 million food workers, right? It's larger than healthcare. It's larger than any other sector in the US economy. And yet they are the lowest paid, right? So if we don't figure this out, it is a literal drain in our economy. We're literally pulling down wages and benefits and conditions for all workers, right? It's not just about food workers, as important as that is.
Hear from Jackie. I think we can't, we still can't hear you. Okay. There seems to be some tech issues, so we're gonna try to be able to hear you. But we'll go on to the next question, and then Jackie, you and I will kind of work that behind the scenes. The next question is, what are some of the biggest challenges to local and BIPOC producers in regards to partnering with local schools and school districts that you have seen directly within your work? I'm going to actually start this with maybe Jennifer, so that I can kind of part with Jackie, try to get that together.
Sure.
So Jennifer,
thanks, Dana. I probably have less to say actually than the other panelists about this, particularly because of my own positionality. I'm not doing a lot of direct work in terms of looking at purchasing or purchasing contracts. So I think I'll kind of pass this to whoever else wants to talk, but I'll just mention one thing really quickly and say that I think one thing that can be a real challenge, not only in the context of the US, but in some of the other countries that I've worked in as well, is that some of the local and BIPOC producers in the US, or whatever the equivalent would be of maybe like more disadvantaged growers or producers in other countries, is that sometimes it can be a real challenge with the kinds of specifications that school districts have, and also the volume that they need. If they aren't linked together in some sort of cooperative or something that can help with aggregating supply. I think that piece of some of the supply chain pieces that just need to be addressed in terms of logistics, and some of the requirements that might be imposed by federal or state governments can provide some obstacles for getting involved in that kind of institutional sales.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about this. So as of this, I feel like something that's kind of holding my organization or HAFA back is like sometimes we do these proposals, but then we are kind of like maybe not rejected, but then kind of turned down because like to the fact that we don't really have like certain like specific, like we don't really specialize in specific produce that like maybe these institute that that they want. So from that, I feel like we're kind of limiting ourselves. But then from that, we do strive for a contract. So because if we do have contracts, those are set in place. So then we know that we have secured them. But then I think one thing that have been limiting on our end is like if we propose something but we don't get it, it's because maybe our farmers, we may not grow it. So then we're kind of turned down. So that is like one of the challenges that we are facing here at HAFA, is because yes, we may also, but sometimes we may have their produce, but then we may not have the volume that they are expecting. So that's one challenge that I've seen.
Let's see if we can hear Jackie now. Jackie. Oh, we can't hear you, Jackie. I don't know what happened. We heard you at the first time. No,
it might be your mic setting. Yeah. So if you look at your mic, there should be an up arrow, and you should select, and you can kind of select your different kind of microphone, because I think you might be using your headset, and you might have to use, I don't know, mine's on same as system. Hopefully that helps.
Yep, let me know if you're able to hear me.
There you go. We can hear you.
There you go.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I thought I had toggled it and did not. So thank you.
Yay. So Jackie, I don't know if you want to jump right into this question, as we just got you off. The question was, what are some of the biggest challenges to local and BIPOC producers in regards to partnering with local school districts that you have seen directly within your work?
I mean, I would definitely agree with the comments regarding the volumes. If the folks are not participating in co-ops, I think that that's definitely the case. I also think that while there's been a shift in the direction and more flexibility in menus, some of that inflexibility for certain standards of, fruits and vegetables that would need to be used and submitted through the district well in advance can be challenging for local producers to react to should they experience, unforeseen circumstances. We previously had a farmer there, the weather didn't cooperate and the peaches didn't come along as they were expecting. If it was part of a longer term contract or a larger contract, they're not necessarily able to, supplement with something else as easily in a school system as maybe with some of their other business partners. I also think that forecasting can be a challenge as well. I think it's a little bit easier within schools. Sometimes you have some guidance from the district as to how much participation you can expect. Excluding last year entirely, because I think it was very difficult for us to evaluate how much participation we'd have in our school food program last year. But in general, we usually have a sense for what those numbers are going to look like, how many students to expect. And we can do our best to provide local farmers with those numbers and see if they would be able to independently or through a co-op supply that produce. That's not always, it's not always a resource that, in terms of forecasting, those forecasts aren't always something that their customers are able to provide, which can make it very difficult for them to plan as they're balancing that commitment with their other business prospects as well.
You all brought up something that I think was very interesting in regards to like what the actual local or BIPOC producers grow. Now I was wondering in regards to a culturally responsive menu planning, like would that help in regards to local procurement and that being implemented in values aligned procurement? And just to explain to the public what I mean by culturally responsive. A lot of menu plannings around the country kind of focus on a menu that isn't reflective of different cultures, different backgrounds, different ideologies, and honestly, people of color and where they come from and their own value system in regards to food. And so when we talk about a culturally responsive menu, that menu takes into account all of the parties that are involved and all of the parties that are actually partaking within this food system. So I wanted to kind of ask that question of, would a culturally responsive menu planning, would that help with local procurement? How would that affect local producers and BIPOC producers? And I'm going to go ahead and start with Jose.
Thanks. Sorry, had a hard time getting off mute there. Yeah, I mean, I think, and this question is also connected to the previous one, right? And I have a really hard time answering any of these questions without taking a big step back and like understanding sort of the origins of our food system. The roots of our food system are in slavery, and not just because slavery created a no wage system for exploiting labor, but also because it benefited white supremacy, right? It was a way of maintaining or establishing white supremacy as sort of the norm in this country and of the food system, right? And so that answers, I think, the questions of where we are or why we are where we are, right? And the fact that culturally appropriate menus are frowned upon, or like critical race theory is thought to be some kind of radical socialist thing, right? Where it's really just looking at the history of this country. And all of those things to me are connected in the food system, right? The food system is literally what holds all of that together in a real way every day as we put food into our bodies, right? So anyway, so yes, culturally appropriate food would be better than, what we currently have. Does that remedy the food system? Probably not, right? Like there's probably more, can we get more local producers and BIPOC producers into the local supply chain? Yes. And is that gonna fix the food system? Probably not either, right? So yeah, we need comprehensive solutions. These momentary or these sort of small steps in that direction are not bad. They're good and we should take them. But we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that that is what we need to do in order to fix the food system.
Mm. Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, thanks for opening up the space for this conversation. I think that just thinking about it, I think culturally responsive menus, I think that is great. But I think if we really think about it, like, is it feasible or is it like livable? That because like the thing is like usually what I've seen like on like menus have been planned like a whole year. So then like are they like the people that are planning this are they thinking about like culture appropriate food also too? Well, but I think we have to kind of step back depending on like the school district. Do we have like more of this ethnicity or that ethnicity? I think that plays a big role on depending if they will buy like potentially institutes will buy like culturally appropriate produces for like just like one menu. But then like on my end, just like growing up, I loved it that like once in a while like they would incorporate like food that I actually had from home too. So I think like once in a while would be okay, but just like Jose said, I'm not sure how it would like. I think it would be a big impact, but I'm not sure like nationally or anything like that. I'm not sure how it would work out. But I think but then the things like a little goes a long way. So hopefully in the future that we'll have something like that put in place.
I have two quick things I'd love to add about that. So one is just, even in schools that have free meals for everyone, whether it be through community eligibility or a different provision, I think that we see a lot of places that aren't really, at 100% participation. And I think a big piece of that puzzle is really involving young people and shaping meals around what like communities actually find reflective of, their own like unique histories and values. And I think that one of the challenges within the school food context is that we have a lot of heat and serve meals in schools or components of meals that are used in speed scratch cooking. And that's kind of inherently coming from a different system that operates largely on scale and isn't necessarily able to take into account very localized conversations about what are our values, who are our young people, who are our communities, and what would a culturally responsive menu look like in our schools. So that's why, at least in the work that I do and in my first book, The Labor of Lunch, I talk a lot about this need to have community-based culinary capacity. So the time, the skills, and the labor and the community investment to actually be cooking from scratch at a more localized level, because it's really that I think opens up this space to do culturally responsive menu planning when you actually have the ability to be, doing more menu planning, yes, within national guidelines, but in a way that is reflective of much more, specific community ecologies. So I think that piece of being able to cook from scratch, like at the school or very least in a central kitchen, like district level, is a really important component to how you make something like this happen. And then of course there has to be real structures and opportunities for community engagement around participatory decision making for what menus should actually look like.
I think, oh, go ahead, Jackie.
The only thing I wanted to add, I really agree with Jen's comments, and I just wanted to add that would happen on a continual basis. Our surveys with parents and then with students aren't just happening that once every few years or one and done. I think it does need to be a constant evaluation and looking for new ideas. I think we've gotten a little spoiled at DC Central Kitchen because we do have central kitchens. So we're able to respond and incorporate some of those differences into our menu pretty quickly and work with our dietitians to find opportunities to implement those changes while still hitting nutritional needs. But just wanted to mention, I think that feedback stream needs to be encouraged and regularly.
I think as Jose, you brought out another good point that had me thinking about just kind of the roots of our food system, right? And how it is very entrenched within white supremacy, and just kind of how that has translated into our food system now, to how we feed students and children, and even with the procurement. I always think it's interesting, when you're on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, whatever may have you, and they have these little videos and they show you food from all the other countries. And the food from all the other countries, those lunches look amazing. Those lunches look really healthy and delicious. And to me, they look culturally responsive, because when I look and say, well, why does this particular country have this for this lunch? I'm like, oh, that's that region, that's that area. And so I don't think it is out of the capacity of America to do this. I do think it is literally asking to overhaul the entire system, right? And to the points made by the other panelists, to Cheng Wu's points, it's about kind of seeing like, well, what's the capacity? And then how can we produce this? And then how can we do it? And then asking the communities that we're in, hey, can you provide what this looks like for your community, what this looks like for your community? How do you do these things? It's always interesting what you can see regularly on the menu in regards to scale and cultural responsiveness for America, right? Versus what you can't see, that could probably have the same ingredients that would be culturally responsive to that area and to those people and to those groups. I'm always thinking about things like that. But that kind of leads into this. We only have time for about 2 more questions, because I do want to get to any questions that the audience may have. So this leads into the next question about how can communities support and engage with their local and BIPOC producers to increase the procurement between the school districts and the schools. And I'm going to start with Cheng.
Yeah, to answer this question, I think we have to really think basic. Like, you have to think of this idea of locally grown. As of this, I think also to recognize like any BIPOCs or any other local farmers too, because a lot of the BIPOCs community in Minnesota, they're actually like farming or anything like that, or farmers market wise, it makes up more than 50% of any grower too. And as of that, I think the support and engagement is there, but I think we just have to recognize that like we have these farmers too that need support too, in a way of like, support in like what kind of support? Yeah, buying the produce. I think from that, buying the produce, understanding that, hey, we are here, they are here to make a living too also. And as of this, I think schools, schools and school districts are, I think they're doing a pretty good job, but I'm hoping for like, if like any like people like the BIPOC committee will like propose anything, hopefully they will be contracted to be eligible to be in their program, and send things to them, so that from that they're making something out of it too.
That question is open to the rest of the panel as well. I know within the community that I live in, which I live in actually Prince George's County, Jackie, which is right outside of DC. I know that there is an interconnection between the actual farms that are in Prince George's County and the school system in regards to just kind of certain programs, particularly in the hospitality programs that the school system provides for their students. So it's interesting to see like how we can encourage local, produce and BIPOC producers within school systems directly. I know that was one way that we did it as well. Does anyone else have any feedback in regards to this question?
One thing that we've also done in trying to procure more from BIPOC farmers in the last year in particular is look at our current vendors and the current food hubs that we're already working with, and really leaning into those communities to express our interest in growing our relationships with BIPOC farmers. I think so, and also our other vendors, not just our local food hubs. I think sometimes hearing from us recurring questions of, which farm is this coming from? What can you tell us about that farming community, the farm ownership, the farm staff, visiting farms whenever possible. I think asking those questions and showing that interest with the money behind it to be able to purchase really shows that you have a sustained interest in purchasing from those individuals and want to find ways to be able to work with them. I think that we've had to get a little creative in ways that, we're able to work with some of these farmers. Well, as I mentioned much earlier in the conversation, someone might not be able to provide all, thousands of pounds that we're going to need for the week, but we can piecemeal it together, especially if they're involved in a co-op. So trying to develop systems of communication for them, when a lot of times some individuals are, if they're working at their farm, they don't have a means of communicating with you on a regular basis through maybe your email. Trying to find what works for them, whether it's text message or phone calls or stopping by every so often. Communicating that flexibility has really gone a long way to show that we're willing to work with them and make adjustments to our systems.
Also, I know that, most school systems have, school boards and superintendents that operate, and they actually control contracts and things of that nature in alignment with how they partner with those particular farms and Bipoc. And as residents, as constituents, you can actually, reach out to your school board members, reach out to your superintendent and say, hey, this is what we'd like to see. We'd like to see this to be a policy or a procedure within our actual school district to specifically partner with Bipoc and local producers to have that for the foods that we have for our menu. That's also another way to do that. I'm going to go ahead and give one last question, and we can kind of give a little bit more time for everyone to answer this. But what would be the most important information you can impart to the public about how to incorporate values-aligned procurement within this process of procurement for their school district? And I don't even know who to start with. Everybody's eyes just lit up. I think I'll go ahead and start with Jennifer, and then we'll kind of swoop it around and self-select. But you guys can definitely take a little bit more time on this question.
Sure, and I'm going to piggyback actually a little bit off of what you were just saying, Jana, about how school boards, and I think this is the same for states, especially those that are already maybe investing more money in school food programs, but even those that don't, and the federal government, I think at all these different levels, we need for people to be like really pushing on our public officials to invest in this as a public program. And one thing that I like to sort of explain to people is that I think that there are a lot of people, particularly in middle and upper middle class US, who don't see school food as a program for them in a lot of instances. And I think it's really important that a lot of the people who aren't currently participating in the school meal program understand that this is something that really would benefit not only all students, but our communities and our environment and so many aspects of our food system. If we were to have the resources that we need to really use school food to provide a model of what food justice can look like in this country. So I think that encouraging people to opt into this program, both in terms of eating school meals, because that brings money directly into districts, but also opting in through collective action to really demand this be a public program that can really do kind of all the things that Jose was mentioning earlier in terms of this interconnectedness with so many different issues and so many different forms of injustice in our systems. I just have so much belief in the power of school food, but not if people don't see it and act on it. So I think that we just really need a lot more people who haven't historically seen this as their fight to view it as their fight in order to build the political will and power to change this. So I think just helping people understand this is a place that we can collectively renegotiate our values, but not without these public fights at these different levels of local, state, and federal because of the particular nature of school food as intersecting with all three of those policy levels. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, I will jump in right at the end of that because I agree with all of that. And I would add one thing, which is that in order to get there, the most effective way that I have seen, not that it's the only way, right, but the most effective way that I've seen this work is to build local coalitions, multi-sector coalitions that are focused on passing procurement policies at your city council, at your school board, at your state legislature, at whatever level it is that it needs to happen. But that makes it the law, right? That actually creates an infrastructure for it. So when we did that here in Chicago, and I know there's some folks on the call from the Chicago Food Policy Action Council who were central to doing that. But when we did that here in Chicago, we started with a group of local urban ag folks, local environmental justice organizations, local labor organizations, and then a few sort of outliers like academics and animal welfare advocates and folks like that. And that gave us not only the sort of unusual suspects kind of branding when we went to talk to city council members, right? It was like, whoa, what are animal welfare people doing here with environmentalists and labor folks, right? Like this is a weird combination of folks, but literally a combination that they could not say no to, right? And then that, so the power part was embedded in that coalition, but then it also informed the actual content, right? It gave us an ability to say, this is how all of these pieces talk to each other, and this is how they're interrelated, and this is why we want them all to be included in this policy, and we're not going to negotiate one out for another. This is a package deal, right? These are all the things that we need in this policy in order for it to work.
I would just add to use resources that already exist. I think it can be especially daunting, for people who've been in this work for a while or folks who are brand new to try to navigate the system and, build that infrastructure and those connections. I think that there's a lot of people across sectors that have been working on this for a while. So I would just, really encourage people to find what's out there within your community, your state, your school district, and even a regional effort would go a really long way. Because too often I think we've seen folks try to recreate the wheel, and it can be really, there's a lot of wear and tear there. So see what's out there first. I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised, and you'll be able to hit the ground running where the fight's still going.
Yeah, I think that just like all the panelists said, I think there's so many hurdles that we have to go through to just try to do get things as the best as we can. But I think one thing I would have to say is probably getting the government officials, getting these people in power, letting them know that, hey, we need system change from this. It will impact a lot of things. Farmers, kids, like the students are getting these food at the schools. And as of this, I think one thing that I saw in the chat that I agree with a lot is it's like these gap audits and these and also these and all these certificates that you need to be able to be eligible to sell to these institutes. I think that's one hurdle that a lot of these Bipocs or these local farmers, they're either qualified or they're exempt, but then they just don't have that paperwork to show like, hey, they have the produce, but they can't really sell to these institutes because they're not certified, or technically yes, they are certified, but not in paper wise. So that's one thing I wanted to add.
I want to thank you so much. I wanted to get to, we have about 3 questions from the audience. And so I kind of wanted to hit those. We have a little bit of more time because there's a long break between the next session, and we might go over just a little bit, but I do want to be honorable to people's time, but I did want to get to some of these audience questions. One was, I'd be curious to see / hear examples of values-based solicitation and evaluation criteria in school nutrition or child nutrition programs. Sort of beyond a geographic preference. Does anyone from the panel have an answer to that one?
Yeah, I think that's what I was addressing in one of my previous comments, to look at the good food purchasing policy website, or either the Center for Good Food Purchasing that has a lot of RFP language and other pretty useful information on their website, or Good Food Cities that also has information there about the policy language, right? So whether it be city council language or school board language, but language that actually gets at, solidifying an actual policy rather than it just being, something that the school district wants to do because they feel like this is a good thing to do, right?
Also, we have another question. Would love to hear more about how you all integrate and reflect on centering healthy foods while also being culturally relevant and the misinterpretation of what foods are unhealthy. I can reread that question to kind of unpack it a bit. Would love to hear more about how you all integrate and reflect on centering healthy foods while also being culturally relevant and the misinterpretation of what foods are unhealthy.
I can kick us off with that. I'd say that one area where I feel like there's been a lot of progress made has been particularly in some states with more Native communities and thinking about Indigenous foods and traditional foods and how to incorporate those into school meals and farm to school contexts. But I haven't really seen as much of that same work going on with other like aspects of, not only trying to think about decolonizing school food or the diet, but in thinking about, well, what are foods from, different traditions that might exist in our communities and how can we, think of those foods first instead of thinking about kind of the same 10 fruits or vegetables or entree items that are served consistently across schools. And I think at the kind of national or even continental perspective, there's some really interesting work going on in Africa right now with so within the context of the UN's homegrown school feeding program, to say that there's been this focus historically on trying to source local food for the school meal programs in a number of countries around the world through this program. But specifically, there's this group of people continent-wide who are saying, well, we really need to reinsert our own views about what constitutes healthy food and make that be food that is culturally specific to us and our continent. So actually, I'm working on an edited book right now that includes contributors from about 17 different countries on what transforming school food politics looks like in their context. And that's a big thing that the authors from the African countries that we're working with have really focused on a lot, is really reclaiming what nutrition means and how that can inform the design of their school food programs. But in the US, I think the place where I've seen the most success with that is in thinking about Indigenous foods and specifically the connection to Native American communities.
I think in our experience, there has been a bit of a lag between, some of the feedback that we've gotten to incorporate culturally appropriate food and what is healthy versus what our standards currently are with our school menus. While we might want to present that balance and share foods that, again, people are asking for, it is difficult to meet those standards at the same time, even though we know that health priority looks a little bit different than what it looked like when those standards were set. So I think if your organization has access, and we're fortunate enough to have this, we have very skilled dietitians that are able to take a look at those products and incorporate them on a weekly or monthly scale, or even highlight them through special events and opportunities to where we'd have a specialty menu in the school so that kids still have exposure to that item, even if we can't formally have it on a menu. We're also testing out certain recipe ideas to be tweaked so that we can work within the structure that currently exists. But I think that there's, for us at least, we've experienced a little bit of a lag because of what those health standards are.
Thank you. Okay, and then we have another question is, recognizing the importance of all the values, can you name a specific value that you have had to focus or prioritize on in your work and why? Even though I know Jose has continuously reinforced, they all are interconnected, they are specific, and I recognizing that is still, nothing has changed. Is there one that you have felt that you have had to focus on maybe more than the others within your work?
Oh yeah, labor for sure. The problem is that frankly easier to talk about some of the non-human things, right, that have no voice of their own. It's harder for a number of reasons, including that labor increases price, to talk about something like workers and exploitation of workers and what is fair and what is right. So in the context of which one is more important, I would say none of them. They are all equally important. In the context of which one is harder to get across to folks to wrap their heads around, labor is the big one, I would say.
This is open to the whole panel.
I would also say labor has been the piece that I've really tried to sorry, the most in my work, but not just talking about what some of the implications are for how labor can, when it's devalued, make so many other changes challenging, but also in getting people to really recognize all the different forms of labor, even that exist like in the cafeteria. So I mentioned earlier, there's this emphasis, I think, in particular on culinary labor, particularly within the farm school and like scratch cooking crowd. But I think it's just as important for us to be thinking about the emotional labor that cafeteria workers are doing, and to be thinking about how it feels for young people to be seen and to be recognized and respected in these spaces. So I think that piece of really trying to look at some of the gender dimensions of cafeteria work and how they've been devalued over time, just like other forms of care work, has been the piece that I've like most kind of tried to pull out as, how are we valuing cafeteria workers? They're both food workers and care workers, and we need to be emphasizing both of those pieces when we're thinking about what values we want to put forward in the future of school food.
For our organization, at least currently right now, one of our focuses is animal welfare. Several panelists have talked a bit about the food purchasing program, and that is something that we participate in and have gone through that evaluation process. And coming out of that evaluation, we know that animal welfare is something we're going to strive to continue to improve. Some of it is, it's a lot of research, trying to source new products from your existing vendors, finding new vendors. Ching mentioned some of the certifications might not be held by an organization, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they have those responsible practices. So trying to get at the root of that information when it's not easily something that you can just look up online all the time. And then of course, cost, we only get so much of a reimbursable amount for these items, and trying to balance those costs to hit the animal welfare targets and top of your nutritional standards. And as we've all said, all of the other target areas that you're trying to meet.
I think the last one would be Chang.
Yeah, I think I want to just add maybe about relationship building with these institutes. I think once you get a good relationship building with them, after this, yes, the produce will come, but then these contracts also, they would just come on a maybe like a yearly thing. So I think relationship building with and also relationship building with all these where all the produce goes to. I think knowing where the end product is at, I think that's something to really think about too.
I want to thank all of my panelists for joining me today. We are kind of at time, well, pretty much at time. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and having this very important discussion about values-aligned procurement. I think we've just scratched literally the surface of this, and there's so much more that we can talk about. And I hope to have you guys all back to just even get more in depth with this kind of communication and conversation. But to wrap up today, we did want to share a few ways that you can continue to stay connected with us, the National Farm to School Network, and to continue this important work of learning about and putting into practice the work of shifting power towards this vision of a racially just food system. We want to hear how you are committed to shifting power, either as an individual or within your organization. Sign our call to action comment form, which will be dropped in the link in the chat, to share what actions you're taking. Tell us how you continue to support us in this collective work and how we can support you. We have dropped a link in the chat box now. Also, sign up your organization to become a partner of the National Farm to School Network. We're seeking partner organizations in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. U.S. territories, and sovereign nations who are committed to joining us and working towards our call to action. We are specifically looking to build partnerships with organizations that are community-owned, in which the voices of the most impacted are not only centered, but deferred to, and that align with our core values of economic and environmental justice, health, racial equity, workers' rights, and animal welfare. If that sounds like your organization, we'd love to hear from you. And we've added the link in the chat box as well. And lastly, stay engaged with us in your inboxes and your social media. You'll be getting a follow-up email from us after this event with a request for your feedback and some other follow-up resources. In that email, you'll be able to update and add your email preferences in hearing from the National Farm to School Network. And you can follow us on all social media channels, including under our handle at Farm to School. Tag us in your posts to show us what you're doing to build a racially just food system in your community. Thank you so much for joining our conversation today. And we look forward to seeing you at the rest of the panel and for the rest of the event for our Shifting Power sessions.